Hello and welcome. I'm Stephen. I'm your host for today's session, and I'm really excited to have you here for today's webinar on mastering UDI compliance, ensuring global market access and patient safety. If you're involved in manufacturing, regulatory affairs, or even supply chain management, unique device identification, UDI, is a critical part of patient safety, market access, and operational safety and efficiency. To put things into perspective, in 2022, more than 430 million medical devices were recalled. Why? A mix of mislabeling, traceability failures, and data inconsistencies, all of which UDI is designed to prevent. Without a properly implemented UDI system, medical devices can be difficult to track in case of recalls, which leads to safety risks for patients. They can be rejected by regulators, which causes costly delays and lost revenue, or lost or mislabeled in the supply chain, which creates logistical problems. So, regulators worldwide have made it clear, UDI compliance is not optional. If your device doesn't meet UDI requirements, you risk losing access to the US, to the EU, to the UK, and other major global markets. So by the end of this session, you'll have a clear roadmap for achieving UDI compliance without unnecessary delays or complications. Here is what we're going to cover. So, number one, what UDI actually is and why it matters beyond just regulatory compliance. Two, how UDI requirements differ across key markets, including the FDA in the United States, EU MDR and the UK MDR, and what that means for your labelling, data submission and implementation timeline. Three, the most common challenges companies face when implementing UDI, from data management issues to labelling inconsistencies, and how to avoid costly mistakes. And finally, four, best practices for integrating UDI into your operations, making compliance efficient, making compliance scalable, and making compliance sustainable. So, why this matters to you? Essentially, every manufacturer wants to avoid regulatory headaches, supply chain disruptions, and potential recalls. And a well-executed UDI strategy helps to prevent all of those issues. But here's where many companies go wrong. They underestimate the complexity of UDI implementation until they run into serious problems. It's not about just applying a barcode. It's about data accuracy. It's about regulatory submissions, ensuring every label meets global standards. So that's why today's session isn't just about explaining the rules. It's about giving you practical steps to get UDI compliance right and get it right from the start. So, how to get the most out of this session. So throughout today's webinar, I'll be breaking down real-world UDI implementation challenges and solutions. And as always, if you have any further questions following today's webinar, you can drop them in the comments below or email them directly to us using the email address at the side, Riddion@riddionresourcehub.com. We'll respond to all questions received after today's session. So let's get started. First, we will break down exactly what UDI is and why it plays such a crucial role in the medical device industry. Okay, so what is UDI and why does it matter? We will start with the basics. So what exactly is UDI and why is it so critical for medical device manufacturers? UDI is a global system for assigning a unique, trackable identifier to every medical device. Think of it as a passport for your product, ensuring that devices can be accurately identified and tracked throughout their entire life cycle, from manufacturing all the way through to patient use. Each UDI consists of two key components. First is the device identifier, DI. This is the fixed portion of the UDI that identifies the specific model or version of the device. Product identifier, PI. This is the dynamic and includes details such as the lot number, serial number, expiration date, and manufacturing data. Together, these identifiers allow regulators, healthcare providers, manufacturers, all to track medical devices efficiently accurately and, most importantly, in real time. So why does UDI matter? Without a standardized identification system, tracking and managing medical devices will be incredibly inefficient and error prone, especially when dealing with recalls or counterfeit products, even supply chain issues. So if we look at a real world example, imagine a manufacturer discovers a defect in a batch of knee implants, for example, after they've already been distributed to hospitals worldwide. Without UDI, identifying which implants are affected will be a logistical nightmare. Hospitals would have to manually search for records, cross-check batch numbers, and reach out to multiple departments, all while patients remain at risk. Now, considering the alternative of the same situation with UDI in place, each implant carries a unique barcode, linking it to its batch number, its manufacturing date, and distribution history. Regulators, hospitals, healthcare providers can all scan UDI, instantly pull up the relevant data, and pinpoint exactly which devices need to be recalled. Instead of pulling thousands of implants from shelves, they can target only the affected ones, reducing disruption and risk to patients. So, looking beyond recalls, UDI also plays a huge role in preventing counterfeit devices, ensuring only legitimate, regulated products reach patients, enhancing supply chain efficiency, allowing devices to be tracked in real time as they move through distribution channels, supporting post-market surveillance, helping regulators monitor device safety and performance more effectively. If your device doesn't meet UDI requirements, you won't be able to legally sell in many of the major markets, including the US, FDA UDI rule, European Union, EUMDR or IVDR UDI requirements, United Kingdom, MHRA UDI system. Each of these regulatory bodies has strict implementation guidelines, so this is why understanding UDI compliance is essential, whether you're preparing to implement UDI for the first time or looking to optimize your current system. Knowing how to do it correctly and knowing how to do it efficiently is key. And that's exactly what we'll cover in this session. So up next, we'll look at how UDI requirements differ across the US, EU, and UK, and what that means for your compliance strategy. So UDI compliance across key markets. While the FDA, EU MDR and UK MDR all have the same core goal, which is ensuring traceability, patient safety and regulatory oversight, the way they enforce UDI requirements is different, and those differences matter. Failing to meet UDI compliance in any of these markets can lead to regulatory rejection or even product removal. And that's why understanding UDI requirements vary, or how they vary across these markets, is critical. So we're going to break it down market by market, starting first with UDI compliance in the US. Now, the FDA's rule has been in place for a decade, rolling out in phases based on device risk. It started with Class 3 devices, then moved to Class 2, and finally covered Class 1 devices by 2020. So by now, every medical device sold in the US is required to have a UDI label. But what does that actually mean for manufacturers? First, every label needs to contain both human readable and machine readable information, typically in the form of a barcode, QR code, or RFID tag. That identifier must be generated using an FDA accredited issuing agency such as GS1, HIBCC, or ICC-BBA, ensuring consistency across the industry. But UDI compliance isn't just all about the labelling. The FDA also requires manufacturers to submit UDI data to Global Unique Device Identification Database, GUDID, which is a publicly accessible database that helps regulators, healthcare providers, and even patients track and verify medical devices. One key difference between the FDA and other regulators is that it does not require a basic UDI-DI. Instead, each individual device version or model gets its own device identifier, which serves as a unique tracking number. Reusable surgical instruments and other devices that undergo reprocessing before reuse also fall under direct part marking, meaning the UDI must be permanently marked on the device itself, not just on the packaging. Now, this is an area where some manufacturers run into compliance issues, particularly if they don't account for the added complexity in their design and labelling processes. Moving on to the UDI compliance in the EU, where UDI compliance is governed by the medical device regulation and in vitro diagnostic regulation. While the EU or the EU's UDI system aligns with international best practices, it introduces some unique challenges that manufacturers need to be aware of. One of the biggest differences is the requirement for a basic UDI-DI. Unlike the FDA system, which assigns a device identifier for each version or model, the EU requires an additional identifier, the basic UDI-DI. This identifier doesn't appear on device labels, but is used for regulatory documentation and reporting. Essentially, it acts as a grouping mechanism for related devices within the same regulatory submission. Another key distinction is where UDI data is submitted. Instead of GUDID, the EU's UDI data is stored in EUDAMED, European Database on Medical Devices. However, EUDAMED is not yet fully operational. This means that while manufacturers are still required to comply with UDI labelling rules, the full database submission requirements are temporarily postponed. But that doesn't mean that you can afford to wait, because once EUDAMED is fully live, compliance will be mandatory, and failing to register UDI data could block your market access. Device classification is another point where the EU differs from the US. So while the FDA uses GMDN, the EU relies on the EMDN. If you're selling the same product in both regions, you need to map your devices correctly to avoid misclassification issues. But despite these differences, the fundamental goal remains the same: ensuring that every medical device has a traceable, standardized identifier that can be used for regulatory oversight, it can be used for recalls, and used for post-market surveillance. Moving on to UDI compliance in the UK. Since Brexit, the UK has been working on its own UDI system under the UK Medical Device Regulations, UK MDR. Right now, the UK's approach remains closely aligned with EU MDR and FDA principles, but that could change as the Medicines and Healthcare Products Regulatory Agency, the MHRA, finalises its post-Brexit regulatory framework. At the moment, manufacturers selling in the UK can still use CE marked devices under transitional arrangements. The MHRA has confirmed its plans to introduce a UK-specific UDI database similar to EUDAMED and GUDID, although the exact implementation timeline is still in development. For now, companies marketing devices in the UK need to ensure compliance with EU MDR, UDI rules, as they remain valid under UK MDR for the time being. Monitor MHRA updates closely to prepare for future changes in labelling and data submission requirements. Be ready for potential UK-specific UDI requirements, particularly if the UK moves towards its own standalone regulatory framework. So, while the UK is still in a transitional phase, you should stay proactive and prepare for any potential divergence from EU MDR rules. Having a flexible UDI strategy will help ensure continued compliance. If you sell medical devices globally, UDI compliance isn't something you can address at the last minute. Each region has its own specific submission, labelling and classification requirements, meaning a one-size-fits-all approach won't work. The FDA's UDI system requires data submission to GUDID, mandates direct part marking for reprocessed devices, and doesn't require a basic UDI-DI. The EU MDR demands submission to EUDAMED, enforces the use of a basic UDI-DI, and follows the EMDN classification system, making it different from the FDA's GMDN approach. The UK is still evolving its post-Brexit UDI framework, and while it currently aligns with the EU, you should be prepared for upcoming changes. To stay ahead, focus on implementing a standardised, flexible UDI strategy that can adapt to evolving regulations, ensuring data accuracy across different regulatory databases, and keeping up with new developments in the UK's regulatory framework. So, Getting UDI compliance right the first time is about protecting patient safety, ensuring product traceability, and maintaining access to key markets. Next, we'll explore some of the most common challenges you will likely face when implementing UDI and how to overcome them efficiently. So look, mistakes happen, and they're usually in one of three areas. First being data management, second being labeling and direct marking, and three, keeping up with regulatory changes. If you don't get these right, it can hold up your approvals, it will likely disrupt your distribution, and even force a recall of your products. So we'll go through what goes wrong and, more importantly, how to fix it, beginning with number one, UDI data management. So the biggest challenge with UDI isn't the barcode, it's the data behind it. Regulators expect UDI entry to match exactly what's on the device label, and that's where a lot of you will run into trouble. A common issue is that UDI data is scattered across different teams and the information is stored separately. And if data is entered manually, even a small formatting error, like an extra space or a misplaced character, can get a submission rejected. Once that data is sent to a system like the FDA's UDID or the EU's EUDAMED, it's locked in, and fixing mistakes takes time, and if there's something incorrect, it will cause you delays. So, best way to avoid this, centralize everything. Instead of different teams managing UDI data separately, it should be stored in one connected system, ideally within your ERP or regulatory compliance software. Automated data entry also helps. When the system does the formatting and validation for you, there's less room for human error. So if you're still relying on spreadsheets and manual tracking, it's a red flag. It only takes one mistake for regulators to flag your submission, and fixing it isn't always quick. Moving on to number two, labeling and direct part marking. Even if your UDI data is perfect, compliance isn't guaranteed unless your labels and markings are clear, durable, and readable. So if your barcode gets smudged during production, fades in storage, or isn't printed properly in the first place, again, that's a problem. For single-use devices, the biggest challenge is print quality and placement. Barcodes need to be positioned where they won't get damaged or obscured. But for reusable instruments, like, let's say, scalpels or even surgical tools, the challenge becomes even greater. Labels don't survive sterilisation, which is why regulators require direct part marking for devices that will be reprocessed and reused. And if direct mark isn't applied correctly, whether it's a laser etching, chemical etching, or dot peening, it can become unreadable after multiple sterilisation cycles. And hospitals need to be able to scan the UDI every time the device is used. So if the mark wears off, it's a compliance failure. Testing labels and direct part marks at the manufacturing stage isn't enough. They also need to be checked after sterilisation, throughout the supply chain, and even at the point of use. If a barcode can't be scanned when it's needed, the whole system breaks down. So that moves us on to number three, keeping up with regulatory changes. The FDA has already made updates to its EUDID submission requirements. The EU's EUDAMED database is in the process of being rolled out, a new module, and as new modules go live, submission expectations will shift. UK's MHRA is developing its own UDI system, which means companies selling in Britain will soon need to follow a separate set of rules. So if you fall behind on these changes, it can cause you serious issues. A manufacturer that was fully compliant last year could suddenly find itself out of step with new submission formats, with new labelling expectations or database requirements. And when that happens, fixing the issue usually isn't quick or cheap. So the best way to stay ahead is to treat UDI as an ongoing process, not just a one-time task. That means subscribing to regulatory updates from the FDA, the MHRA, and the European Commission, so you're aware of new requirements before they take effect. It also helps in these situations to be involved in industry groups that discuss upcoming changes. Sometimes those discussions happen months before regulators announce new rules. So if you track these developments early, you have time to plan, you have time to test, and time to roll out updates without disrupting your operations. So up next, we will take a look at the best practices for integrating UDI compliance into daily operations. This will help you make your process smooth, it will help you make your process scalable, and will help you in the long run. Okay, so best practices for a seamless UDI integration. A smooth UDI process doesn't happen by accident. It takes planning, it takes the right systems, and making sure everyone involved knows exactly what they're doing. The ones that struggle with UDI are usually the ones that treat it like a last-minute task. They rush to apply labels, submit data, and just hope it's correct. The ones that get it right are the ones that build UDI into their daily operation so it becomes part of how they do business. So, we'll run through the key steps to allow you to make that happen. Starting with step 1, having a clear UDI strategy. So, before anything else, take a step back and figure out where you actually stand with UDI compliance. Do you already have labelling in place? Is your data structured correctly? Are you confident your submissions will be accepted by the FDA's UDID, the EU's EUDAMED, and eventually the UK's new UDI system? A lot of manufacturers just assume they're compliant, then they have an audit and it turns out they're not. And that's why a gap analysis is so important. Instead of guessing, you're identifying exactly what needs improvement. Maybe your database isn't set up properly, or maybe your barcode verification process is weak. So fixing these issues now prevents bigger problems later. So the key here is not just thinking about UDI as a regulatory hurdle, but as something that makes your business run better. Moving on to step 2, stop relying on manual data entry. If you're still managing UDI records in spreadsheets or manually entering data into different systems for each market, it's genuinely just a disaster waiting to happen. Compliance is about precision, and manually handling data across multiple regions, each with different submission formats, is an easy way to make mistakes. FDA, EU MDR, and the UK all have different database requirements. So if you're entering UDI data by hand for each submission, sooner or later, something won't match. Maybe it's an incorrect lot number, maybe it's a formatting error that gets your submission rejected. Whatever it is, fixing it takes time, and time costs money. So the best way to avoid this is to automate the process as much as you possibly can. Using compliance software that integrates with the ERP or data management system can standardize submissions. It can catch errors before they happen and keep everything aligned across all markets. Some companies wait too long to invest in automation and they think they can manage UDI manually. So getting the right tools in place early saves the eventual time and frustration which will occur further down the line. Step 3, make sure your entire team understands UDI, not just the regulatory team. So one of the biggest mistakes I see companies make is assuming UDI is only a regulatory issue. It's not. Manufacturing, supply chain, IT, even customer service teams all play a role in compliance. If just one department doesn't understand what's required, mistakes can then start to creep in, and those mistakes likely will lead to rejected submissions. Take manufacturing, for example. If they aren't clear on UDI labelling requirements, they may print a barcode incorrectly or place the barcode where they get damaged in transit. If the supply chain team doesn't know how to UDI data tracked or should be tracked, they could create inconsistencies between what's in your system and what gets submitted to regulators. So the solution to this is ongoing training. A one-time session just won't cut it. Regulations change, new employees come in, so the best at this make UDI training part of their regular compliance program, ensuring that everyone involved knows exactly what's expected before issues arise. Step 4, keep an eye on compliance. A lot of companies think that once they've set up UDI labels and submitted their data, they're finished, they're done. And the reality is that's not really how it works. Regulations changed, products get updated, labelling requirements evolve. So if you're not regularly checking your compliance processes, it's only a matter of time before something is missed. So the best way to stay ahead is to run internal audits on a regular basis. Now that means checking that your UDI data is still accurate and matches what's on file with regulators, testing barcode readability at different points in the supply chain, not just when the label is first printed, and reviewing upcoming regulatory changes from the FDA, from the EU, from the MHRA, to make sure you're prepared before new rules take effect. Catching small issues early is a lot easier than fixing major compliance failures down the road. Making UDI a seamless part of your business. So companies that struggle with UDI are the ones that treat it as an isolated task, something they only think about when a deadline is looming. But companies that handle it well integrate it into their daily operations. So if you want to stay ahead, have a strategy. That means knowing where your weak spots are, fixing them before they cause problems. Use automation, eliminate manual errors, and streamline regulatory submissions. Train your team on a regular basis. UDI isn't just a regulatory issue. Everyone needs to understand their role in the UDI implementation process. Monitor compliance continuously. UDI is an ongoing process, and staying ahead is the best way to avoid setbacks. Now, when you get this right, UDI compliance stops being a frustrating regulatory burden and becomes a system that actually helps you and actually helps your business run more smoothly. Now, up next, we'll go over some of the most common questions submitted by you about UDI compliance and clear up any remaining concerns that you may have. Okay, so before we finish, let's go through some of the most common questions we've received as submitted by you about UDI compliance. So if you're dealing with any of these issues, you're not alone. These are the things that trip up manufacturers the most. So start with question 1. What happens if my UDI is incorrect? So it depends, and it depends on when you catch it. If the error is found before submission, you can fix it internally, run validation checks and make sure your data aligns with what regulators expect. But if incorrect UDI data is already in a regulatory database, that's a bigger problem. For example, if you submit incorrect UDI records to the FDA's UDID or EUDAMED, your entry could be rejected, likely forcing you to resubmit. And if that device is already in distribution, things can get complicated quite quickly. If a recall happens and your UDI data is wrong, you could struggle to track down affected products. So the best way to avoid this would be to automate UDI data validation. Most errors come from manual entry, so a centralized UDI system that automatically checks for inconsistencies before submission can help prevent these issues before they ever reach regulators. If a UDI error does make it into a database, fix it fast. The longer incorrect data stays in the system, the harder it is to trace and correct. So moving on to question 2. Do Class 1 devices need a UDI? Yes, but the deadlines and the rules on this depend on where you're selling. So in the EU, all Class 1 devices must be UDI compliant by May 2025. So that means they need a UDI label and their data must be registered in EUDAMED once the database is fully live, of course. Now, this applies to everything from basic surgical tools to low-risk diagnostic equipment. Now, the FDA already requires UDI for most Class 1 devices, but again, there's some flexibility. Some low-risk products like sterile instruments fall under enforcement discretion. That means the FDA isn't strictly enforcing UDI compliance for them right now. But again, that can change. And if you assume your product will always be exempt, you could get caught out if enforcement tightens. The UK is, as we know, still finalising its UDI system, but manufacturers can, or you should expect it to follow a similar path to the EU and FDA. Even if your device isn't legally required to have a UDI yet, getting ahead of the requirements is probably the smartest move. Question 3. What if I sell in multiple markets? Okay, so if this is the case, you need a coordinated strategy. The biggest mistake people make is treating UDI compliance as a separate project for each region instead of building a global system that works across different regulations. A product could have one UDI version in UDID, another in EUDAMED, and a third in the UK system. And if any of those records don't match, then again, you've got a serious problem. So the best way to handle this is, number 1, use an accredited issuing agency. So as we touched on earlier, GS1, HIBCC or ICCBBA. So your UDI format works globally. 2 would be to centralize UDI data management. So every region pulls from the same verified source. 3, have a dedicated team monitoring regulatory updates. The rules aren't static. What works today will likely need adjusting in a year. And question 4, how does UDI implementation, or how long does UDI implementation take? Okay, so for most, probably 12 to 24 months. I mean, it's all about assigning UDIs to all product variations, updating labels, integrating regulatory submissions, and training multiple teams. A company with a small product portfolio and an organised regulatory system might get everything done in a year. But if you've got hundreds of product lines with different packaging and different manufacturing locations, it's going to take a lot longer, especially if you're selling in multiple markets. A rushed UDI rollout usually results in more errors, more rejected submissions, and more last-minute corrections. And that's why I advocate for a phased approach. Ultimately, it works best. Start with a gap analysis to see what's missing, prioritise high-risk or high-volume products before expanding UDI compliance across the board, and engage regulatory experts early, so you're not wasting time fixing avoidable mistakes. The ones that plan ahead here make the transition smoothly without disrupting production, disrupting their business. And on that note, that's all the time we have for questions today. So if you want to make sure your UDI implementation is smooth and avoid common pitfalls, as we've discussed, here's what you can do right now. You can download our UDI compliance ebook and guide directly from our website. Now, these resources walk you through everything from assigning UDIs to ensuring your labels meet regulatory standards. They include practical steps and strategies to streamline compliance across across global markets. You can subscribe for regulatory updates. UDI requirements are always evolving, as we know, with new deadlines, new enforcement policies coming into play across FDA, EU MDR, and UK MHRA. So staying informed keeps you ahead of these changes. And if you need expert guidance, reach out to us. Whether you're planning or just starting UDI implementation, need help fine-tuning your compliance strategy, our team specialises in helping manufacturers navigate UDI implementation and UDI compliance in the long term. And remember, if you can submit any further questions to us at Riddion@RiddionResourceHub.com. We're here to help. So thank you for joining today's session. I hope this has given you valuable insights into UDI compliance and what it takes to get it right. And if there's one final thing I can ask from you, if you're watching today from our YouTube channel, please do me the favour and like and subscribe. So that's it from me. It's been a pleasure hosting you for today's session. And as always, stay informed, stay compliant, and we'll see you next time.